I know I'm not the ideal image when people think about an Afghan woman, but I think that's what I'm trying to break is there is no ideal image for an Afghan woman. There is no ideal image for a Muslim woman. This is the ideal image for me. And that's all we're going to talk about. It's me. It's you can have your preferences, but that's your preferences. And someone's opinion is not a fact. Thank you for sharing it. And I'll share mine and we can agree or disagree. But at the end of the day, there has to be a common respect of allowing each other to just express ourselves.
So Izaba, Sarabi, Paraz, thank you for coming on our show today and bringing along with you your experiences of what you've gone through from the early days of being an Afghan immigrant young girl to America and your evolution to making huge changes in places like LinkedIn for professionals, that entire story and all of the trials and triumphs along the way. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Mohammed, for having me. I'm super duper excited to not only share my story, but hopefully share some tips and tricks for those who are just having internal battles with themselves and how they can change not only society, but change, things around them. And that includes, attracting people, places, opportunities. So I'm really excited to just kind of share that story and hopefully, shed some light on the challenges of wanting to be yourself.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. In fact, I've even heard once to say, you can't change the world. You can only change yourself. And it's amazing in your effort to go and really just change yourself. Look at everything that you're doing. And I'm just so glad that you're able to join us today. Thanks again for coming and sharing the story. I think this is maybe the first time I'm actually speaking with you. In the past, it's been like just, messaging on LinkedIn, right? What a world.
I know, we've come far from LinkedIn.
We have. I think we have. And I just wanted, before usually somebody comes on, I get some time, right? We get a few minutes just to really chat about some background thoughts, right? And really prep ourselves into really kind of getting into that mode for, our actual dialogue or conversation that we're going to have. So just to take a few minutes on that, I definitely want to get to know you a little bit better and then really try to get a better understanding of, I reacted to, what I thought was an amazing post and a very different looking post that you did on LinkedIn. That's a while back. So to me, what I recall of it was that it had to do with the professional environment and headshots and showing or not showing tattoos. Am I recalling this correctly?
It was, yes. It was just a headshot that I uploaded, just not really thinking anything of it, but essentially it was just that. It was just a new LinkedIn headshot. There was nothing, I think, that, in my opinion, was like, oh, this is definitely a call out. It just was, I just didn't wear my blazer and I had tattoos and I uploaded a headshot.
So, okay. Well, okay, let's maybe just think about that for a second, guys. So you never really wanted to go out there and make a statement, get on this mission to change the world?
No, I'm far from somebody who I think thrives in that type of sunlight. I'm very much would much rather not have the sunlight. But it just was I think so much was happening in not only my personal, but also professional life. I'm an Afghan woman. So, all that stuff that had recently happened in Afghanistan about, I would say 2 to 3 years ago, I think just kind of added on to this persona that I think I had been living with, just being an immigrant child from Afghanistan in the USA. And I just figured, enough is enough. I'm no longer hiding who I am. I'm not going to Americanize my authentic name pronunciation. This is who I am. There was definitely lots of obstacles. I think lots of fear before I finally decided to, make that. But I just wanted to pretty much just go on LinkedIn and say, hey, this is me. This is what I look like. We all work in Zoom. We all work remotely. But behind what you see in Zoom from, shoulders up, this is me. And you can't change that. And it has nothing to do with whether or not I'm capable of doing my job. And so I just uploaded it, went to bed thinking, you know what, I'll get 3 likes in the morning, call it a day, not thinking anything. And it truly did blow up. It blew up, I think, in a way that I never would have imagined, or just in a way that I think would really resonate with folks that had so many similar challenges. I mean, the stuff that even now I read back on it, I'm just so shocked and amazed that just a simple post triggered this like huge movement on LinkedIn?
Yeah, like there's two sort of separate things there that you talk about. One is, we're on LinkedIn, and everyone on LinkedIn is obviously it's using it as a professional, form of social media. And we're there to be known and be seen. And then there's a question of how do we want to be known and how do we want to be seen? And there's this underlying, obviously theme of keep it professional. And, now that I think about it, it is going back actually 3 years ago where just globally our heads were in like different places maybe than they were today. So take us back there if you can, and maybe even before that, because you said you're an immigrant, you came here from Afghanistan. What was that experience like? Because that I think all leads up to that final decision. Like when you were leaving Afghanistan, do you remember how it was when you were leaving? How old were you?
I was really tiny, honestly. I think I was maybe under a year old when it happened, so I don't recall much of it. I do recall most of my life, I think, post that. It's just kind of growing in the U.S. So leaving it again, I don't remember. I was a couple months old. We first immigrated from Afghanistan to Pakistan, and then we finally came to the U.S. So Pakistan, I think it was like a little 3-4 year old placeholder until we were able to like get all our papers. So I don't remember much about kind of leaving, but I remember a lot about growing here as an African American.
Right. So you came here to America. America is like the first place you have like real memories of. And do you feel like, and I have a lot of friends, people I actually train with who are from Afghanistan. And what I love about people from Afghanistan is no matter how long ago they left Afghanistan, they really hang on to their culture. I feel like really well. They speak their language. Their food is food is culture, right? So the food is the food, right? But they hang on to their language. Did you find yourself in America? And America is like, when you're growing up there, you're American or it sometimes feels like you're not. It's either you are or you're not. How did you what were your sort of first, ways in which you identified yourself or felt that you were identifying yourself?
Great question. And in true, authentic, and transparency, Mohammed, I definitely want to say 100%, and, not very proud statement, definitely masked my culture and identity growing out of Afghanistan. Like you mentioned, you're either American or you're not. And then you add in all the different, cultural adjustment, the processes, family and community, even post 9/11. I think that definitely molded and shaped how I think identified. So growing up, not a lot of people knew about where I was from. I didn't really go embracing my culture. I didn't really speak the language. I tried very hard to, only speak English. I Americanized my name. I only hung around with folks that didn't have a lot of culture tied to them or weren't very immersed in their culture. So there was a lot of clashes, I think, just within my own self growing up on my own personal identity of, do I really identify as an Afghan? What parts of my culture or even religion is important to me? And what parts am I, quote, Americanizing? It was a lot. I challenged, there was challenges, obstacles. I think the main thing, to your point, Mohammed, I think that cultural piece is part of it, is that identity and cultural preservation is, we do a lot to not only keep those, but also create spaces to host, our other growing things we pick up here. So it was a challenge growing up. I think that shaped how I showed up at work. It showed up how I did my job, how I communicated. And again, I credit a lot of, my embraceness back to my roots to the past 2 years, is kind of having that awakening. And as a mom now, I think now I understand the importance of my heritage, my culture, and why it makes me who I am. And I think also it made me more empathetic towards my parents and everyone else who's going through, a renowned identification, whether that's immigrating from a different country to the US or a different country to a different place. We go through a lot, and there aren't a lot of handrails or guardrails to really help us on this is how you adjust. This is the language. These are the new norms. I mean, you throw a strict Muslim Afghan family. I'm one of 9, Mohammed. So I have 8 other siblings, and you throw us into America.
Okay, got it. Yeah, right.
So, we were thrown in, and we're like, okay, this is all, 9 of us. My parents are trying to, so we honestly, it was survival. Whatever helped each 9 of us survive, we did it. And whether that meant we Americanized a name, that meant we dropped names, that meant we went through nicknames. At that point, our family was what can you do to survive in America? And our parents were first, they didn't speak the language. So we were also helping our parents navigate through those challenges.
That's what I find is so amazing is that, you know what? There's no book on it, right? Mm-hmm. How to come to America from Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And when you write that, even if someone were to write that book, do you write it as an Afghan? Do you write it as a American? What are the things that are most important to one person might be, different for another person. Mm-hmm. So, and then what I find really amazing about your experience as I get to know it better is that, while we're going through this as children, because I came to Canada when I was very, very young as well, not at that age, I was a little bit older, but it's not like we're sitting there going, so what do I identify myself as, And so what am I going to do now? Like a lot of these things happen very on a maybe subconscious level, sublime level. Everything is just kind of like happening in real time, as they say. So we're not necessarily sitting there and having meetings about it and making checklists, pros and cons. You're a kid, so you look around you, and what does a kid look around and say, that they're going to use to identify them? Is your family really that you look at, which is in transition and making decisions based on, adapting or surviving in this sort of new environment. Mm-hmm. And it's not like it was one of those moves necessarily for an Afghan family, if I understand it correctly, and please shed light on this. It's not like you were moving from Afghanistan to America is like, I have uncles there, and we're gonna settle down there. It was sometimes a move that wasn't necessarily, planned from earlier on. And this is what we're gonna do. It was just, circumstance, right, that led to that.
No. Yeah.
So you're not sitting there consciously making these decisions. And so now that if you look back, and you mentioned, you kind of hinted at this earlier when you were speaking, but there's certain things that we sometimes look at to help us with our identity. And you mentioned some of that nowadays, but when you think back, you went to school, right? There's the playground, there are friends. Yeah, there's family and siblings. What do you remember standing out to you as now when you look back in moments where you might have said to yourself, hey, yeah, sure, I want or I need to identify this way, right? It wasn't necessarily like I want to, it was more like I need to. And then what were those things that kind of that you formulated in your mind to say, yeah, so I'm going to change this specific thing, or these specific things. Can you take us back to that?
Yeah.
You thought about this.
I have, and I think I've built my whole, and I think I still continue to kind of mold myself and kind of relearn myself. Growing up,
sure.
As I mentioned, I didn't have, I think, the most mentors. I didn't grow up in an environment that had a lot of cultural diversity where I had other people, in schools that looked like me, that understood my culture, that understood what it means to not speak English, to wear different clothes, to come to school smelling like One-Two or something that's not, perfume. So I want to say I credit a lot on two people in my life who've, outside of family, who's really helped, I think, hold my hand. And no matter how many times I changed my identity or I was very lost, these two people really helped me kind of ground myself. And it's I would say my two good best friends, and I'm still best friends with them till this day. I've known them for about 20 years. So they've kind of known me from a lost girl in elementary school that didn't understand who she was, didn't understand English, never really made a lot of friends, but also was very afraid of making friends, to now these two women in my life that no matter where I struggled, they were like, hey, you know what, English is hard. Here, we'll help you. They took it upon themselves, I want to say, to really just help me out of the good of their own heart. And mind you, we're 9, 10 years old, and they were just like, you're new, we want to help you. And it formed a lifelong love and friendship that I cherish till this day. And even now, if I'm feeling lost, I'll go to them. So outside of my family, those were the two folks, because I didn't have a handbook. I didn't know what English was. I didn't know what the American culture was, what the norms were. And anytime I had a cultural shock, they would stop me and say, this is normal. This is not normal. This is how you navigate. Or they would tell me, hey, pause, how does this make you feel? In true reality, when I look back, they were like my mini therapist growing up, because they were there. And I think vice versa, I was there for them. It's like, oh, as somebody who's new to this, world, this doesn't sound right. And we were able to kind of help each other. And growing up, that's what we did, is each time one of us struggled with our identity, with our culture, we honestly had authentic conversations, Mohammed, of like, well, what does identity mean to you? You know, what does culture mean to you? And we had these conversations really young. And I don't know if that's because we were forced to grow up, right? We are all people of, we're women of color. We are women who belong to families that not everyone went to college, that got immersed in this culture. So I think because we were forced to grow up so soon, it changed and shifted our mindsets where we weren't really playing with Barbies and baby dolls. We were like, how do we survive? And how do we help each other survive? Because we don't have anyone. We don't have uncles and aunts and cousins to, you know, go and like have a bad day. We only had each other. So yeah, I would say those two women till this day, they have helped me through every single challenges, identity crisis of my life. Until this day, they continue on to just be that backbone for me.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think that's great that you give credit to people along the way. And I feel every story I've heard, there are always these like, you know, I won't call them angels really, that we're surrounded by, that we're blessed to have. And one way or the other, we're looking for them and they're looking for us. And somehow along the path, they're there. Mm-hmm. Were they, I'm just curious now, were they from Afghanistan? Were they local? How did you meet them?
I met them in school, in elementary school, and it was just one of those like walking in the lockers, you know, I mean, not to be a sappy, sad person, but I would always just be there by myself, and I would eat lunch by myself. I would just sit by myself, and they just one day picked it up. And so one of them, her name is Sonia, she's Colombian, and then the other one, her name is Fiorella, and she's Peruvian. So they're not Afghan, definitely, again, two different cultures. But I think there was that similarities of us, three of us, you know, trying to survive, trying to navigate elementary school and middle school and high school and college and navigating, you know, all the things that come with it. So even though they weren't exactly Afghan, I think we had shared experiences. And I think that comes down to how we relate and how we connect to folks, is those shared similarities, no matter how small or big. If their wound, you know, hurts the same amount as my wound, we find that similarity and we kind of stick to each other.
That's really interesting. So you had these two amazing people around you, and you still have them around you. And even though I would say, like, I noticed that you mentioned them being there and they're great. You talked about them being like the therapist. Like friends often play that role for us, right? Just help us keep our sanity as we're going through it all, give us the validation sometimes, and sometimes just give us the feedback and the criticism that we're prepared to accept, you know, from them. And they give us that kindness. They give us that warm feeling when we're cold, or that, you know, that feeling that we're not alone. Mm-hmm. In spite of having that, though, would you still say that you were still trending on this path of still changing yourself from not being Afghan? Were you still doing that in spite of having the friends who were there to kind of tell you it's okay, you're great, you're loved, you're welcomed? You still felt that need to, I don't know what the right way to say it is, but still, you know, kind of evolve yourself, mm-hmm. right? Into not being what you knew you were, even then. Is that fair to say? And you were still doing it. Well, so why were you still then? Why were you still doing that?
Survival. Okay. And I keep going back to it because I think it has, I think, shaped and molded so many of my life decisions. But I think one of the biggest drivers was just being Afghan, not having a college degree. And then I think post 9/11 created a lot of things. So I definitely think hit a lot of my identity. I mean, even my name, it's still something that I'm correcting. Even like my two good girlfriends, I Americanized so many things. I masked so many things only because I was trying to fit in. Back then, let's say 10 years ago, social norms, professional norms were so different. We were cookie cutter. I work in HR, so automatically there was, you know, no tattoos, you couldn't have piercings, there was all these dress code requirements, and I had to make a living. I'm one of 9. I had to help my family. You know, my dad was the sole provider for our family, and my mom was a stay-at-home wife. So you put all the responsibilities on my dad, who's literally working, you know, again, back then was, I would say, low-wage roles and low-wage jobs to make an income, not having a college degree himself, you know, supporting a family of 11. I saw, I think, just the hardships that my dad faced, the cultural barriers, language barriers. I think even the degree requirement that till this day is just, you know, it's still a requirement. It's still some sort of paper ceiling that we all need to hit. But growing up seeing his resilience, seeing that no matter how many times society or American culture norms kind of threw him at a curve, his strength for making sure that no matter what, and making sure that he was providing for his family was so strong that he made everything just kind of seem like something to brush off his shoulder. And growing up, I wanted to do the same thing. My dad was my hero, and he still is. I wanted to make sure that my dad wasn't working 6 jobs. I wanted to make sure he wasn't working 20.
You were actually this as a kid.
I was. That's what I say. I think I had to grow up so fast that that's why I didn't go to college. I was maybe 10 or 11 when I met these girlfriends that I was just like, my dad works hard. And they're like, yeah, my dad works hard and my mom works hard. And we're like, well, we want to spend more time with our dad and mom. How do we make this work? And that's when we were like, we need to work. We need to make money. Like, clearly, America, this is how you survive. You have to. And so that's what I set out to do. I set out to get a job so that way I can give, my paycheck, part of it, to my family. And that's what I did. I didn't go to college. I started Americanizing my name. I started tailoring the way I talk. When I would get tattoos, I think this is, jumping forward, I think Opportunity at Work, where I currently work, might be one of the few places that actually knows I have tattoos. All my previous roles before that, nobody really knew I had tattoos. I was long sleeve, cookie cutter, button up, very much wanted to fit the norms, but that's one of it. It was just survival, Mohammed. It's how do we survive in a new culture where there's no book, nobody's helping you immerse yourself. There are no guides. Like, you don't immigrate to America and there's some sort of like consultant that's like, hey, new family, let's help you. And for me, that I think shaped everything for about 2 years ago, where I was living with this mindset of I must fit in, because if I don't stand out, no one's going to be able to point at me and say, hey, I wanted to blend in as much as I could, which I think goes back to my LinkedIn post of like, it just was too much for me at some point, but it's survival. I think most immigrants who have parents that don't have a college degree, then you add all the different barriers, being a person of color, being a certain ethnicity, identity, you have so many challenges and you have to figure out the best way to survive. And for me, that was not really identifying as an Afghan woman. It was, how can I fit in so I can get a job? And that's what I did.
All right. So I'm going to flip a gear here, because I wonder if it needs to be said also. And I hear this a lot, because I was born in another country. I moved here from Africa, and I feel like as you tell the story, I'm recalling similar sort of feelings, right, that I went through as well. And I also then got to a point where, Muhammad was Mo, and the same things. It was like, Canadianizing is how I would say it, or Westernizing is how I used to say it, but it's just almost the same thing. Mm-hmm. And then there kind of grew this, it's like this negative sort of sense towards Canada or towards America, where it's like, you're changing me from who I am to who I kind of, like there's this feeling. It's like this, you force me to not be myself. Mm-hmm. But I also want to say, I think it needs to be said, I wonder that at least America, had a door open for your family to come over here. Canada at least had a door open to say, hey, maybe we don't have the book out yet, or the perfect consulting, program or settlement program, but at least here's an opportunity. Like, here's a door. And it's not easy necessarily, or not fair, but certainly if it's that bad, then you didn't have to come here. Like, you could have gone anywhere else, and it would have been maybe even, with like even less opportunity. At least a door was open. At least there was a country. At least there's a place that said, hey, okay, you know what? We don't have it all figured out yet, but come here. And I think there's a little bit of, and I find America and Canada certainly to be one of those kind of places where you can come. And yeah, there's always going to be, everywhere I feel I go, even when I go to other countries around the world, there's this sublime pressure to assimilate, right? We're social creatures. We want to assimilate. So in that assimilation, we might change ourselves a little bit to fit in. That happens, I think, everywhere. But I think also here, there's this opportunity that you find now that if you do want to change again, you want to be yourself, whatever that it means, you can be. Mm-hmm. And that you might get ostracized a little bit from different places, but you still can. Mm-hmm. At least there's that, like, call it freedom. Do you feel that exists, at least to set up the circumstances for you to, after you said, wait, I want to change some things. At least there was that opportunity to change again, to change who you are, to at least evolve and grow yourself.
Yeah, I think in my instance, I do think I had that opportunity where I was able to almost like, shed my moldings, emerge as like a new butterfly. I think had that. Now, I'm not going to say it was, like you said, very easy. There was, like you mentioned, those challenges of people not fully being able to grasp their head around this new change, or like this new alternate of like interacting and boundaries. But I definitely did. And I think it may not, if I didn't have had that, I don't think the transition would have been as easy, because it did give me a stepping stone of like, okay, I feel comfortable enough where there's not a lot of, chaos around this. And I can slowly, like an onion, start peeling different layers.
Yeah, speaking of the butterfly, I love that sort of metaphor there. But if it was too easy sometimes to change, we wouldn't have had to require that conviction level to make that change and to be sure that this is what I want for myself. So I also think that sometimes also plays into, helping us kind of solidify exactly what we want, exactly where we want to go, because we realize actually it's not that easy. Right. And I want to get to that part now, is like, when you started realizing, you said early on, like, I had enough, there's just too much now. Mm-hmm. When you said too much, can you like elaborate? Like, what was too much? I mean, you're being accepted, you're getting the jobs, you're growing in your network, you're fitting in. How is that too much now? Like, what do you mean?
Too much in the sense of the world was accepting me. I was getting jobs. I had a great organization, but it was getting too much because I was being accepted for someone I wasn't. And when you live with that identity of having to be someone who you're not, eventually you do hit this internal battle between yourself and who this new persona is. And that's what I literally hit that, I think, August of 2021, 22. And again, I think I credit most of it was when Afghanistan had the overturn. I saw personally people with my name, my family, my cousins, everyone I knew struggling with so much. And I was sitting here in my 9 to 5 with my little latte, with my, clear water. And I'm going, I wonder if people will accept me if they found out my name is pronounced differently. And I think when I thought of the way my challenges were and what challenges were back home for my family, I realized that they were doing so much to preserve themselves, their homes, their culture, their names, their country, their colors. And I did so much in a few years to erase all of that. And I think that's when I was like, no more. I'm not. My name has history behind it. There's a reason my parents named me who I am. There's a reason why my parents had us. And for me to come and be accepted for someone I'm not, that was too much. Now I want to be accepted for who I am. I want people to understand I'm a child of immigrant. I want people to understand I'm from Afghanistan, because then you get to understand me more and you get to understand all the things that make up of me. So yes, it was great that America, or not even just America, the world accepted me for who I am. But if it's not for who I am, it's not worth it.
That's amazing. I just like, I know that same thought. And I think a lot of us have that, not just people who are immigrants, actually. I think sometimes it happens that maybe it's because whatever, we see movies or shows and we say, hey, that's beautiful, or that's cool, or that's in. And so I should be that, or I want that for me. But it has to start with that feeling that, first of all, I'm not good enough. And where did that feeling come from? So we build up, right? And then ultimately you get to this point that there's this state of like, almost like, okay, I'm not surviving anymore. I'm not having to worry about survival anymore. And then you notice others, you point to that, who are like, who got it in some ways harder, but are not giving that up, are not negotiating that. I call that life credit, by the way. Like, if I were to title a book, it would be this is what you talk about, I think it's called life credit. It's not a currency. It's not money. It's, it's who you are. It's the value. It has huge value, obviously, right? And then at some point in time, you're like, I'm not going to sell this for a job. I'm not going to exchange this, like a currency. I'm not going to exchange this for a job. I'm not going to exchange this for friends. I'm not going to exchange this for whatever. I want this back. and the first thing that happens in any exchange is, well, to get that back, there's a risk now that you're going to have to give something up. And what were the thoughts in your mind? Like, you were thinking about this now, and your mind is way more like, sophisticated. And if you make these moves, you may lose certain things, right? You may have to give up some. What were those things as you were making these calculations that you might stand to lose or have to exchange?
Everything.
Oh, wow. Come on. What? No. Come on. You really thought you were going to lose everything? Like, define everything. Come on. I appreciate the detail.
It's, when I say everything, I mean, you really do become a new person. I had to, and I think when I was like, okay, I'm going to emerge as, this new butterfly, I don't think losing was on top of my mind. I think what I was more focused was what I would gain from it. And I think that just came from, I had such a great support system that no matter how many times I had different colors, they accepted me. And so I understood that those people that are going to be in my life, regardless of who I am, how I identify, how many times I evolve, were continuously going to be there with or without their, constructive criticism on how I evolve. But I wasn't afraid to lose because, Mohammed, I've lost so much. I've lost opportunities because I don't have a college degree. I've lost friends and family, or even, I would say, like, even just neighbors or people that I interact with the moment they have to either say my name correctly or find out where I'm from, or like just all of that. When you lose so much, you're just no longer afraid. So when I was emerging with my new self, I was like, hey, this is just another thing I get to do in my life at this point in time. And this point in time still doesn't define what I'm going to do or set up the rest of my life. But I was very excited, actually, Mohammed, to just be who I am, because I was not afraid of my surrounding and the people in it.
So there's two things that really stand out there that you talk about, and it's something that I would call it, like, you felt like your essence was not really actually changing. Your essence is actually now becoming like more realized. Yes. And your essence, you yourself, was already loved and appreciated by these others who were confirming that, hey, whatever, I don't care, like the color of your shirt, the sound of your voice, or whatever, that you realize that. And then the other thing is that you mentioned that I think is really amazing, is that you realize not only you weren't focused on what you would stand to lose, but what you would stand to gain, but you also noticed that you might lose anyway. You might lose this, you might lose that, regardless. You had lost so much. You had lost so much, like you said, in the process of evolving to this stage, that now evolving to the next sort of chapter, you're like, well, there are going to be losses either way. Mm-hmm. And you made those calculations. And so when you first started making this, like you said, you have it down to the month and the year and maybe even the date, right? There was like, you were like, starting now. It's like, was there an order in which you were like, okay, this is what I'm going to do first, and then second and third, or did you just kind of like shotgun?
I opened up everything. I was like, let's just do it all at once. No, I think I did everything at once. So one thing that I definitely say was, I think the starting tip was my name. I started out with that because I think that gave a common ground of like, oh, this is a change. My name is something that everyone says, whether I'm working, shopping. And I think for me, having that first instant of this is my boundary, we're going to start with the one common thing that we say so repetitively throughout the day, that anything I add to it, for me in my head at that time, it'd be easy. So name was the first thing. And then anything after it was just kind of, oh, okay. And people started to get the hang of it because the name is so repetitive that by the time 6 or 7 times, they're like, okay, what's next? Well, what else can we try now?
Oh, wait. It wasn't always like, what was it? And what did you make it then? Like, or what, and then what did you make it back to?
My authentic Afghan pronunciation of my name is Izaba, which is, I understand, is a challenging name. The accents do not carry over to the American, alphabet, but my entire life, I think from the moment we immigrated from the States to about 3 years ago, Muhammad, it was Izaba. And it was simple, people could say it, but that again, I altered it because it was easy and I'm not spending, again, what's your name? Izaba. Say it again. This whole like little dance we tend to do. And I started with that. And I think one of the main reasons to give some background of why I started with my name was it was the easiest thing to change. That dance was uncomfortable for me because then that meant I had to unravel, where are you from? Where's the heritage behind it? And I didn't want to, but now I was comfortable and I wanted people. So I would say it's Izaba. And then it would be, where are you from? What does your name mean? And I was able to uncover those different pieces of me.
Then what? So after the name?
Oh, I was full on blown. I started teaching I'm a mom of 3 girls. So I'm raising, the next generation. So starting with them understanding their culture, when there were certain events like Eid, I would post in our company, channel, like, hey, I'm celebrating it. I started taking PTO. So I started doing, I think, more things that weren't behind the scene or that were still hidden from family and friends. I was able to now fully celebrate who I was, my culture, all of it openly. And I was sharing it with everyone. Again, with the caveat of I may lose colleagues and coworkers depending on how they feel or what their relationship is. But I was okay. And so it was learning. Then it was the culture, watching the movie, relearning the language, the foods. I mean, I was pretty much reborn all over again.
Exciting.
Yes, it is.
So I got to ask you this then, because when we first go through this, again, the reason I spent time thinking and talking through this with you is because, again, I think a lot of us, we go through this, but where you continued, a lot of people stop. And we stop because of let's call it fear of the unknown, of fear of loss. And, again, because we remember that we were in that survival mode back then, we don't want to go back to that. And what if it ends up there again? I don't know. I think that's a real feeling. But then somebody like yourself goes, you know what? But look at all there is to gain if we don't go in this direction. And I love that you said it that way. So now you start making the move. I gotta ask you, those things that were you never worried about the loss, of course. But were there losses? Were there moments where you felt for opportunities that now, oh no, then not you? Did that actually happen? And to what degree did it happen?
I think to different, avenues is when and it's whether it's a sensitive topic or not. And I've known that not everyone's open to having these type of conversations, but I did lose, friends, neighbors, even on social media, on like LinkedIn, despite gaining, I did lose. And I think that comes to my identity and just where I'm from. We haven't had the best relationship, I want to say, in the news and in the world. So there are some folks who are really tied down to how they truly feel about Afghans and just Muslims in general. So putting that on LinkedIn, I was a little nervous. I'm like, I work in HR. I have a lot of great networks I'm able to leverage, and losing those. But for me, I was okay. And I say that, Mohammed, because one of the biggest drivers for not only making this movement is I worked in D&I. So my whole job in organizations is to sit and help organizations become more diverse, more inclusive, train folks. And I got tired of doing that. And I got tired, Mohammed, because I was fighting for everyone, but no one was fighting for me. I wasn't sitting at a table with another Afghan woman. I wasn't sitting at, in an organization with a CEO that was Afghan. And I think that was one of the things of like, I'm not losing anymore. I've gained so much because people have this idea of I'm an American woman and my name is Izaba and I work in D&I. But what they didn't see is that I was not only fighting for D&I for everyone, but also for myself. It's, and I'm going to be selfish here, is Afghans are rarely ever CEOs, board of directors, or at least to my knowledge that I've seen on LinkedIn. And I wanted to be that change. And I think that's why I went to as far as I did, Mohammed, is I don't have representation. And it's okay if I don't, but I'm going to become my own representation. And I will become someone's representation, let's say in 5-10 years, someone's going to enter the workforce who may or may not have tattoos, who may be Afghan, who may or may not have different colored hair, and may stumble across the LinkedIn post and be comfortable. And being able to make that change either 5, 10, 20 years into the future, I think that's what motivated me. It's outside of losing people, like you mentioned, there's so many more things to gain. Is I want to, and I will continue selfishly advocate and become a role model for Afghans and Afghan women, because I didn't have that, and I want people to have it. And I especially want my children growing up to have that role model, or just that person who's breaking barriers, who's making something, who's making it known that we can do it. We're women, we're Afghan, we don't have college degrees, we may speak different languages, our names may be hard, but we can get the job done at the end of the day. And who we are does not define how or what we're able to do.
Wow, I love it. Thank you for walking us through that with all that thought. Now, for the other side of it, and I think we can't appreciate the gains until we've also talked about the costs. A lot of times this is it. People talk about that moment of the triumph, but I really think to really appreciate where you're coming from and what you've had to go through, I think you got to understand the costs or the risks that people like you face. And when you're involved in being a change agent, and you're not just doing it for you. Yeah, you can say you're being selfish, but if you were doing it for you, honestly, it's sometimes, it's, you give up a lot sooner. And sometimes I feel like when you're doing this for others, it's no, you know what? There's this, I don't know what it is, but it just there's this momentum, right? That you feel like you're building. And so now you start doing this and you start noticing probably this momentum. There's some positive things that happen. Maybe you anticipated, maybe you didn't. What were those things? What were the things that sort of, now let's call them the gains, that you looked at and you're like, here's a confirmation. And then it's again, a reinforcer. I'm on the right track. What kind of gave you that sense that I'm gaining here?
With the LinkedIn post, or just with everything?
Yeah, just with everything generally, because I find that it's all related, right? If we don't feel like we're making some kind of progress, if we don't feel like there is some advancement, some return, then there's no confirmation that we're doing the right thing sometimes. So what were the things that, as you did, you noticed maybe neighbors, opportunities, this and that kind of going the other way. But what started coming your way that you were like, yeah, I'm on the right track? What were the confirmations that you got?
Oh, those are good. Those are really good questions. I want to say it's definitely the tangible stuff. When I think about the transition and growth from these challenging moments and how it changed, just not only my life, but personal and career and advocacy, but I see that it made, a positive mindset, not just for me, but for everyone around us. It's being able to make that change one at a time. I think people were catching on of oh, it just takes one person. That's all you need, just one person. I think about a commitment of just learning. I think not only in the D&I work, but just kind of this accepting people for who we are. It prompted a lot of people around me, whether that it's, again, at work or personal, of wanting to learn about not only themselves, but other cultures and why people do the things they do, to really, truly understand humans as humans. Also, I think just for myself, there was a greater sense of fulfillment and purpose. And I think that's something I gain is, like you mentioned, when you're in survival skill, you're always thinking about what could go wrong, what could go wrong. But now what could go right? And I was able to kind of gain a positive mindset, and being able to really be more honed in on what I want to achieve and being more clear about that. And gaining it was just, outside of friends, families, I think the common thing was a newfound love of understanding. And I think that's the biggest thing I could have gained from here. Something that I wasn't expecting would come from this is just being able to understand humans as humans. We all have different experiences. We all have different challenges. And that doesn't mean that my life is right and your life is wrong. It just means we had different options, different avenues, and we chose to do different things. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things I could have gained, because it puts everything all together. Is now I'm able to see you, Muhammad, as Muhammad. I'm not seeing you as somebody who is doing this podcast and you're doing this, because you have to, but it's because you may enjoy it. And that, I think, humanizes us, and it just creates a better world for everyone.
You know what? Again, I don't think that there's a wrong or right answer. I'd love to hear what those different sort of experiences look and sound and feel like. And, sometimes you know, someone wonders like, what's the gain? And you know what? The fact that you just did it, you know, I set out to do this. I said I was going to do it, and then I did it. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter what everyone else thought or what everyone else gave me back. I did it. Mm-hmm. That's also, to me, a huge win that you said you're going to do it, and then you did. And you weren't taking away from someone else or anything like that. You may call it selfish, but you said you're going to do something, and you did it. That's big in and of itself, as far as I'm concerned, you know, that you said. And this is not like anything else. Hey, you know, tomorrow I'm going to go, you know, do a kilometer jog or whatever it is. Those are the things that are important things. This is like, it's very personal. It's very challenging to do. And you went ahead and you did it. Did you find that sometimes people along the way said to you, hey, I didn't know you were feeling this. I didn't know you were thinking this. Really? That's important to you? Sure. Okay, we're in. Did you get any of that?
1,000%. And I got it from all different angles. Again, friends, family, work, it was the same thing you said, Mohammed. Like, I didn't know this was important to you, or like, you've never mentioned it. You should have said something earlier. I'm like, well, if I was comfortable, I would have, but I wasn't. But it's funny to just see, you know, those questions people get of like, they truly not were clueless. I think they just were so in the dark that even now, I think, you know, a good example is my personality. And I'm using my family because my family's known me my entire life. Is my mom and dad and siblings have known me truly as an extreme introvert. Of like, I'm very, you know, yes, me. I know.
Okay.
You know, when I was in my little cocoon.
I totally see.
I was just a quiet girl. I was very organized, cookie cutter. There was like, I was just like my way or the highway. And then when I was like, yeah, no longer, we're not doing this. Even now, my parents are like, who are you? Or my siblings, when I go out in public, They would not necessarily get embarrassed, but I'll do stuff that I think they're not used to me doing. Like if there's music, I'll dance with it. You know, I'll grab my daughters, I'll twirl them. And for them, that's like, oh, that's embarrassing. You're dancing in public. It's because they're not used to it. And I think, again, it still is, even when you uncover yourself, when you become your true self, you're still going to have to hold hands with those around you because they may not know this part of you. And you may have hid it so well for so long that you may yourself be like, oh, wait, I do actually enjoy this. And you're still trying to understand what that means to you. But I still just laugh because even now till this day, Mohammed, I still get questions or still these little comments.
Sure.
From especially siblings and parents of like, oh, or again, even when I speak my native tongue, my mom was like, since when did you want to start speaking this? I'm like, you're right, Mom. I don't know, 2 years ago.
Man, this is fabulous. And I feel so fortunate that we're speaking to you at this time where it's just, I would say, I mean, it's 2 years, it's still some time that's gone by, but it feels like it's just the beginning. And there's so much more to like look forward to as far as the developments, not just for yourself personally, but for all the things that you're part of doing, whether it's in the workplace or culturally, for Afghans, for women. And I, you know, on that point, I was just, sometimes I even had to question myself along the way going, wait a second, when they ask you like, why did you say this earlier? I'm thinking, wait, was this all in my head? Did this just all happen in my head? Did I imagine people not wanting to say my name properly or having an issue with me because I'm not from here, I don't sound like this, or I don't look like that? Mm-hmm. Was that all in my head? No, hold on a second. That was real. So if that was real, how could they possibly be saying we didn't know? Mm-hmm. Like that's so important to you. And you used the word clueless earlier on to talk about like how sometimes it feels. Yet when I talk to others who I think are actually truly in their heart of hearts, they're advocates, they're supporters, or they may not seem right away to be supporters, but they are supporters, like you said, of a human experience, of celebrating our diversities. And they don't have to come from like a foreign background. You know, they're human like everybody else right here in America, right here in Canada. And they're huge supporters. And they're like, yeah, speak up and say something. And my response, or sometimes I feel like a response is like, you might have felt like, where is the platform? So, you know, like nobody said, I think nobody offered you a microphone and said, go on, speak. Right.
Yeah.
And you took that, you kind of had to almost like reach for that microphone and had to be like, hey, I got something to say. this is how you pronounce my name, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you weren't that sort of like confrontational about it, obviously, but, and you know, you had to be so careful. I was thinking about this earlier when you said you're in HR. That gives you an advantage, but that also sometimes can be like the opposite pressure because you're in HR. You're supposed to be a certain way. And you talked about previous, call it policies and procedures, let's just call them, or decorums or codes, right? That are not necessarily written in law, but are there either through constitution, written or conventionally never spoken, but this is kind of like how it is, right? And then you have to probably look at that and go, yeah, well, what if I cross or I seek to cross that line? It could be the end of this. And now you're here, you're starting to feel like the thriving moments are coming because look, you sound like you're really enjoying this, and good for you. Like you should be enjoying it. So I feel like you're doing it great. And that's really why I wanted you to come on and talk about this experience, because there's so much to look forward to. There are so many good moments for those that are waiting there right now, not sure whether they should or shouldn't, and we haven't even talked about the tattoo yet, the headshot. And I'm thinking, well, wait, so at what point in time did you then start like, okay, so I'm going to push it a little further, right? Like, now I'm going to pick this, not fight, but I'm going to focus on this now. And you're really, like, I love be the change, like that sort of like way. But there's something like a saying that's favorite to me. It says, what you seek seeks you, right? And you went out there and you started doing all this. And now you feel like a little bit stronger, a little bit more empowered. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you at least feel it?
I do. I think I feel, it's not just strong, but I think I feel free. And I think that is the driving force of like why I was like, I'm going to push this even further. I'm going to just show the tattoos because I want to be free. For me, it's, there were so many changes that happened. Pandemic happened. We were working, in our little four corners of our homes. We were sitting, typing in our little like MacBooks or whatever. And I just wanted to be free. And I realized that part of it, going back to the work I did, is as I continued to do D&I work, I started to learn more. And I think that was the biggest piece of it. I truly understood what are norms, what are laws, what are policies, and what is the difference. Once I started knowing that, I was like, oh, so it's not illegal to have tattoos? Oh, so it is illegal to fire me because I have tattoos? Once I was able to make those connections, I realized that what I was doing in my work was based on what someone's social norms were. And that's what they wanted everyone, right? Social norms is a collective mindset of what most folks in an organization believe. Once I started doing that, I was like, oh, this is no brainer. So you can't, and I think it's this mindset of like a lot of organizations, especially in the workplace, put this bad rep of, you have tattoos, you can't do the job, you're getting fired. And then there is that fear of just repercussion, getting fired. And that's when I was like, you can't even fire me for tattoos. Like, I am going to show it now.
So, here's the part that I think that's so interesting about you specifically is that, if you were to go back to Afghanistan, mm-hmm. there's social norms there mm-hmm. that are, go against even laws mm-hmm. of the country itself. And they're considered to be social norms. And I mean, I understand a little bit. I understand about the laws of Islam a little bit as well, right? So, when you go there and it's a country that has, okay, these are our laws, this is what they're based on, and here are our social norms. Mm-hmm. I mean, my gosh, what would you be like if you went back there, okay, to Afghanistan? And when I say back there, I meant back to Afghanistan, not behind, but back to your return to Afghanistan. And you start to think, have you ever thought about that? Because now, enter tattoos now, forget about the workplace. That's not a social norm amongst maybe Afghan women, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. So now you fought this battle here to try and bring Afghan women, to forward. And now you're going here, and maybe there are even Afghan women who are looking at you going, mm-hmm. what are you doing? Yeah. What's with the tattoos? So you're facing it either way. And I honestly think that could be sometimes a position where you can really feel alone because you're like, what? Wait, I'm doing this. I thought I was doing this for all of us. Yes. wait, what do you mean? I thought we were on the same side. Do you feel sometimes that the ones you're standing beside for are looking at you going, what are you doing?
Some of them. And I think that's one of the things we talked about, those losses, right? What are those big things I lost? And I think that when I mentioned some, friends, family, neighbors, is you can't, it is a difficult place, and it is a tricky place, because on the one side I have lots of women who are all for like, and this does have to be, well, if we're speaking relatively just for Afghan women, it's saying, hey, this is not what we do. We do not have tattoos, and we don't wear short sleeve. And I think that's when I really have to educate on the difference between religion and culture, because religiously there might be different norms. Culturally there might be. But those two, when you put those two, you start creating this like fine line of like, this is what we must do versus tell me why. And I think that's a lot of where I've had a lot of education on, is even my family, there's this, like my mom, she's a strict Afghan woman from Kabul. She's like, we don't do tattoos. Like how, it goes against what they believe in. But there are some parts, for example, in certain villages in Afghanistan where tattoos are allowed. Now, they're not like, the tattoos I have, for example, but there's facial tattoos that represents part of, their villages, part of like their norms, and that's okay. So I always try to uncover up like, so why is the face okay, but the arms are not? And guaranteed, yes, there are differences. There's those like cultural tattoos you get, and then this is like a picture of like a flower, which is really tied in. But it goes back to of like understanding different norms in different places, in different areas, like America and Afghanistan, different culture norms. Where are you able to maximize, I think, the most for women? And I think that's where my fight is great, I'm an Afghan woman now with tattoos, and now I have Afghan women who are like, we do not do that. Then I try to focus on the positive. Okay, the tattoos, I get it. I could throw in a long sleeve, but look, we're now on a pedestal. People understand us. They hear from us. It's really changing it positively. Is I know I'm not the ideal image for Afghans or Muslims. I know I'm not the ideal image when people think about an Afghan woman, but I think that's what I'm trying to break is there is no ideal image for an Afghan woman. There is no ideal image for a Muslim woman. This is the ideal image for me, and that's all we're going to talk about. It's me. It's you can have your preferences, but that's your preferences, and someone's opinion is not a fact, and that's what I live with. It's a great opinion, and thank you for sharing it. And I'll share mine, and we can agree or disagree. But at the end of the day, there has to be a common respect of allowing each other to just express ourselves.
So well said. Thank you. I mean, and you're saying you didn't have a college degree, and you don't have all these things. Like, look at the proof. Look at how I find when there is true passion and a true, like a sincere intent to just discover and to experience. I mean, you're putting it so eloquently. And look, I'm trying to imagine the challenges you would have had to sit where you're sitting, where sometimes, somebody looks at you and goes, wait, you're an HR? Yeah. What's your qualification? They can bring that back at you so fast, and yet you can stand back up there and go, hey, listen, this is, and like, it didn't happen overnight. You had to go through a lot, years and years, for all of a sudden at that moment, August 20, what was it, 21 or 22?
21.
20. You're looking at a calendar. Did you actually have it marked somewhere?
No, I just have my calendar to write, and I just remember to look at it.
Maybe you have that, I don't know, maybe you put it in a frame or something, like this was the day. Oh, well, what's wrong with that? I mean, if you did it, I'd be like, yeah, cool. That would be great. In fact, I think when your book comes out, you should have like a little
one day
suggesting. But honestly, like, when we look at it, I find that when you tell about your experience, and it's not just this is why I'm so glad that we're talking about it, is that you're not just doing it for you. You're doing it primarily because you're like, listen, hey, whatever, everybody else has got their way. This is just what I went through. This is just what I'm thinking. I'm not going to tell you got to agree with me or disagree. Certainly now, going back to that moment when you had gone ahead and made that post, and he's like, that's it. I'm just putting it out there. And then the next morning, okay, so this is how I got connected with you, because I was like, wow, that's amazing. Somebody stood up and said, yeah. And, I'm just going to include this now in my headshot. And then all the people who didn't think, are you a woman? Are you Afghan? Are you an immigrant? Are you all of these other sort of labels? They just zoned in on that and said, I don't even think that they were about whether you have a tattoo or not. I think they were just about like, yeah, be yourself. Mm-hmm. But tell me, like, what were the things that then happened after that? Like, when people are coming back at you the next morning or the next week, because it didn't stop over a day.
It out honestly behind.
I felt like you started a movement. Honestly,
It did. If
honestly,
you go on LinkedIn and you look at the hashtag tattooed professional, it is a movement where a lot of folks, to backtrace, yes. So I made the post. I had attended like an on-site conference. It was time for new headshots. And, at that time when I started my role with this current organization, I think I had a previous supervisor who had tattoos as well. And then he ended up leaving. So I was the only HR professional. And so when I started recruiting other team members, they all came from organizations where it was the same thing. They had to mask who they were. So they came in here and I was tattooed that. I was like, let's just be ourselves. Like, as long as we get the job done, like, that's it. We're all trying to survive in this world. We're all going to the pin. The world is, so many things. Let's just do the one thing we have control over. It's how we do our job. And I took the headshot, like you mentioned, went to bed, woke up, like 100, 200, like, okay. And it kept blowing up every day, Mohammed. I think every day I would get up by the second, like, my work colleagues were like, I think marketing at one point was like, org-wide, they're like, something's happening. Is there a promotion going on? Like, we're getting a lot of traffic. Like, what's going on? And I was like, oh, just me. I was like, I think my headshot blew, but I even had to think, because that idea of like, boom, I think was a little too much. But there's a combination of a lot of things, Mohammed. One thing that stuck out to me the most, like you mentioned, was despite having so much on that headshot, it focused on a lot, right? I didn't just put just tattoos. It focused on my pink hair, me being an immigrant, not having a college degree, being a woman from Afghanistan, and tattoos. What struck me was, I had so much. What struck me was so many people were focused on tattoos. This tattoo still, till this day, even despite all the different distractions, I want to say, a lot of folks were generally really concerned about the fact that a headshot had tattoos. And a lot of people, and there was mix. I had a lot of positives that were like, yes, I want to do this, all for you. Thank you for, creating a platform. But there was equally the same amount of folks that were, mind you, it's LinkedIn. It's a public place. People legit would write, I would never hire you. You look like insert a curse word here or bad word here, or like, just like the meanest things you could think about. But again, me being positive, so many people instead were like, I want to do this. So now when you go to LinkedIn and you look up the hashtag tattooed professional, a lot of people actually, Mohammed, went and re-uploaded their headshots to show their tattoos, to show their pink hairs.
That's what I noticed.
It was beautiful. I mean, I think I was sitting and just like, even now I'm still trying to catch up with like my inbox, but I think that to me was like, I did it.
Wow.
I did it. And it wasn't like, I wasn't trying to, but what made me sad was how many people were trying to do that. How many people were struggling with identity and just being tattoos. But I think I also noticed a trend of the systems in place, specifically in America, and how that's been used for and used against certain populations, and seeing, I think, that common theme throughout my post. I think ignited that fire of like, there's still systematic issues that we need to think about, that we need to rip and make that barrier. But this is the beginning. But I did enjoy, the people that reached out. I had so many people like just reach out and share their stories of, even so, like, I'm still not comfortable, but your post made me happy. And I hope one day, or like, I'm going to sit and sleep on it. And I hope that in 2 or 3 months, I find that confidence. It's just the fact that I think the tattoos was the common thing, because it's been historically had such a bad rep that it was the first time that, like you mentioned, on a professional setting, we have somebody that's, I would say, kind of like cleansing it of like, all right, it's time to put it, trying to make room for some authenticity in here.
Well, it's growth. I think it's growth. And like in many areas or many platforms or field, I think it's great that LinkedIn and places like LinkedIn, there's that opportunity to just go ahead and do it. Your post wasn't censored, for example. It wasn't taken down. The things like that can happen in platforms that are out there, and we know that they do, but yours didn't. And so, while you were being bold, you were being tactful, you were being respectful. And I think those are like key elements for being able to get a message out there, right? And you cross some lines, but you didn't cross other lines. And I think that was very wise of you. That was brilliant. And, that's the part where I thought I didn't just observe you and what you were doing. What I noticed was the ripple. And I was like, oh my gosh, you didn't see that coming, I'm sure of it. And when that comes and they're posting like, I'm going to do this now and I'm going to do this now. And people are like, and I started following like those people as well. I was like, wow, I wonder what their stories are going to evolve into as well. And you know what is funny? Like, you didn't even see this coming. It was like, click, and you sent it that one night, not knowing.
Yeah,
really.
Went to bed.
Yeah, just you think again of it. You like, the next morning, like, you're not excited. Like, I wonder if I got the job.
Yeah.
You're thinking, I'm just gonna wake up tomorrow and I'm gonna make my coffee or whatever, drink my latte, and here it is. The world is changing, mm-hmm. And that's the amazing part, is that you don't necessarily give yourself, I would say, credit that I went to sleep with the intent of changing the world. But you did. You did have the intent. You did put in the hard work. You know that people see the post and what happens after that. But what I appreciate you sharing with us is all that happened before that moment, that led to that moment. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people, I think, who, like you said yourself, who said, I don't quite feel like, I bet you when they look at you, I'll tell you what they say. I'll tell you what they're saying. They're saying, I'm not as strong as you are. A, they'll say that. Two, they'll say, I'm not in the position that you're in. Like, you're really, you've got these advantages that I don't quite have. Mm-hmm. So they look at you and they're holding back. But actually, you didn't necessarily have advantages. You didn't really see yourself as being in some position, right? What do you say to people? I mean, I know you're of the opinion and the nature of like, listen, when you're ready, it's your life, whatever. But let's face it, things need, if you're about being the change, you want to see change, you want to see growth, not just for their own life, to have a better life for themselves, to finally live an authentic life. You want that for people, and they want that for themselves. They're sitting on the precipice. They're sitting right at the edge of it, and they're saying, I don't feel like I'm as strong as you are. What do you say to that?
Great question. I would give two answers. There's a two-part answer because it truly does come to the person. It's easier said than done, right, Mohammed? I mean, I could go like you might seem like, let's relax just it, but it's a lot harder. One I would say is, at least from my experience, what helped me was you need a great, and when I say great, I'm not saying 50 to 100. It could be 2, it could be 3, a great group of a support system. Because when you fail, and you will fail, I failed many times, people's words hurt at the end of the day. So even though I'm strong and even though I was able to do this, at the end of the day, the words people said still hurt. People were attacking me, my family, youth, people are just rude. But what helped me was I had a great group of support systems. So when I would get depressed or I would want to quit, I had my 2 girlfriends. I had my husband.
You had these experiences of depression and being depressed about it and wanting to quit.
1000%. Okay. I mean, you go from, you think that by now I have heard everything I have heard and that everyone has said, but it shocks and boggles my mind what new things people come up with every day. But I did.
And it still hurts.
Yeah. We're human. Words hurt. I don't care what anyone says. You could have the toughest barrier, but someone's going to say one thing that's going to trigger something you've been hiding or trigger a past experience that reignites it. But you need a group of support system. You need people who, when you want to quit or when you do quit, help you climb back up, who understand who you are, who can help build that up. If I didn't have that, I would have probably took the LinkedIn post down, probably quit my job, moved to like someplace else.
Right.
You cannot, and you can, but for me, you can't do it alone. You need people to hold your hand because it's not easy. The second piece I'd say is outside of just a group of networks, start small. That's what I did. I didn't just create the LinkedIn post. It was like, great, I'm going to just open this. I started internally. I started with friends. I started with family. I started with coworkers, then with different networks. Then I started with like restaurants. I started with my name. In order to get comfortable, you have to get uncomfortable. And that's what you have to do. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable or else you're not going to go anywhere. That would be my 2 things. I didn't do it alone. I didn't have privileges. I didn't wake up and was a CEO. I was like, oh, okay, I have like 500 people that would approve this. I knew that if I failed or when the words came, I would have people to be like, no. I mean, even as you notice on some of the posts, I had friends and coworkers that would respond to people's mean posts. So I wasn't fighting this fight alone. And that's what's important to remember at the end of the day. You may feel alone, but as long as you're not fighting it alone, it makes a huge difference.
I want to ask you what you're working on next, but I'm not going to do that. I know that in order for you to be successful at what you're doing, you have to have, like you said, your plan. You have to have your discretion, and then you got to go about it, the way you're going. And I'm sure you're working on something next.
See.
So I see another episode coming in a little while. I'm going to look you up and I'll be like, hey, so how did that go? But, for now, I just want to just say so much thanks to you, for doing what you did. When you went around and when you were facing this all, you weren't doing it for the thanks. You were just, like you said, you were just tired. That's how the position was where you started from. And then you mustered up the willpower to go and do this. And not that you need congratulations or kudos, but to you, to your family, to your friends, to your whole group, because like you said, you didn't do this alone, but then also you didn't try to do this alone. Sometimes people try to do it alone. They don't allow others into that space, right? They feel like it's their personal fight. Whereas, you were allowing others to come into the space. And sometimes even your biggest supporters sometimes will say things that you're like, listen, I don't need to hear this right now. I need you to tell me that I'm right.
My mom and dad.
They're there. Yeah. Great examples. Where would we be without them, But just thank you, for doing it. And then thank you for joining us today. And we would try and we went back, we would try to connect, and it was so worth it. The wait to have you come on and to share your experience, and really to inspire me and inspire so many of us that are really sitting sometimes there at the edge of should I, shouldn't I? And work on our identities and continue to evolve and live that sort of the genuine, that authentic life. So just thank you.
So thank you. And again, thank you so much for reaching out. I've had so many, I think I've been very privileged and just very happy with the opportunities I've gotten to share my story. But I've been, I think, very nitpicky on who. I definitely want to share my story with, folks like you who have a genuine interest, who are willing to sit and really understand not just what happened, but how it happened and where we got there, because that, I think, is just so important in people's stories. So really appreciate you, Mohammed, and the team for taking the time to just learn a little bit about me. I hope that, there's some words of wisdom in what I've shared. And I just hope that with this, and the message people get out is don't try to do it alone. If you do, have a support system, and that especially women of color, we have opportunities if someone like you, Mohammed, is willing to give us that platform or microphone to share it. So just thank you for giving this opportunity to me.